You get the email. Your raise is approved. $20,000 more a year, starting next month. You do the math immediately. $20,000. That's a vacation fund, a bigger apartment, real savings finally starting to build. You picture your bank account a year from now, $20,000 heavier than it is today. Fast forward 12 months, the raise came. You worked harder for it, longer hours, more responsibility. And somehow, your savings account looks almost exactly like it did before. You didn't buy some extravagant car. You didn't take some luxury vacation. You didn't suddenly start living like a millionaire. Here's the question worth sitting with for the next 12 minutes. Where did it go? By the end of this video, you'll be able to trace exactly where. Here's the sentence that changes how you see every raise you'll ever get again. A raise isn't a lump sum that lands in your account. It's a number that gets divided, taxed, absorbed, and quietly upgraded away before you ever get to decide what to do with it. Let's break down what actually happens to that $20,000 because it doesn't arrive as one single event. It splits into at least 3 separate forces working on it simultaneously. There's the tax bite, the portion the government takes before you ever see it. There's lifestyle creep, the slow, often unconscious upgrades to how you live that scale with your income. And there are the automatic upgrades, the costs that become easier to justify once your income rises. A better apartment, a newer car, more expensive insurance, more convenience, without ever consciously deciding to spend more. 3 forces. 1 raise. And almost nobody accounts for more than one of them at a time. Let's start with the most direct one, taxes. In the US, federal income tax uses a marginal tax system, meaning your raise isn't taxed at some single flat rate, but the additional income sits on top of what you already earned, taxed at the rate for that specific bracket. Here's what surprises people. A $20,000 raise pushing you into a higher bracket doesn't mean your entire income gets taxed at that higher rate. Only the portion inside that new bracket does. But depending on your income, filing status, state, and payroll taxes, a portion of that raise can still disappear before it reaches your bank account. And for some workers, that difference can be substantial. For this example, let's assume $6,000 goes to combined taxes and payroll deductions, leaving $14,000 in additional take-home pay. That's already a meaningful gap from the $20,000 you originally pictured, and taxes turn out to not even be the most interesting part of this story. Here's where it gets less mechanical and more psychological: lifestyle creep. Lifestyle creep isn't usually one big decision. It's dozens of small ones. The slightly nicer apartment that felt justified because you could finally afford it. The restaurant delivery that replaced cooking because you're busier and it feels earned. The subscription upgrades, the better car, the gym membership that cost 3 times what the old one did. Research on household spending consistently finds that as income rises, a significant share of that new income tends to get absorbed into higher ongoing spending not saved or invested, particularly for expenses that scale easily like housing, dining, and discretionary purchases. In fact, recent Federal Reserve Survey data found that in 2025, more American adults reported their monthly spending had increased over the past year than reported their income had increased, a snapshot of exactly this dynamic playing out at a national scale. This isn't a character flaw. It's a well-documented behavioral pattern. Your sense of a normal cost of living recalibrates to your new income surprisingly quickly, which means the comparison point your brain uses to judge whether you're doing well shifts right along with your paycheck. You don't feel richer for long because your baseline for enough moved at almost the same speed as your raise. Let's follow that raise upstream and see exactly where the pieces land. You started with $20,000. $6,000 went to taxes, leaving $14,000. Now imagine lifestyle upgrades, the better apartment, the more frequent takeout, the upgraded subscriptions, quietly consuming another $10,000 to $12,000 of that remaining amount. In this hypothetical example, that leaves only a few $1,000s of the original raise actually ending up saved. Then there's a category people almost never calculate: the cost of the raise itself. For some promotions, new expectations come attached: professional wardrobe, a longer commute if the role is at a different office, more frequent client dinners or work travel that isn't fully reimbursed, or simply the psychological need to look the part of someone earning more. None of this shows up as a single line item. It shows up as dozens of small purchases that feel individually reasonable and collectively add up to real money. Here's the counterintuitive part. The raise itself was never the obstacle. The obstacle is that a raise changes your income and your spending triggers at the same time, and spending triggers tend to move faster than most people's saving habits do. There's a psychological effect called hedonic adaptation. We get used to improvements surprisingly quickly. Applied to income, this means a raise produces a real but short-lived sense of financial relief, which fades as spending recalibrates upward to match it. Think of it as the upgrade reflex, the almost automatic tendency to translate more income into more consumption at roughly the same rate income grew, rather than deliberately directing the increase itself into savings or investment before your spending habits have a chance to adjust. The dangerous part isn't that people spend more when they earn more. It's that this happens by default, without a decision ever being made, which means most people never actually choose to keep their raise. Their spending simply absorbs it before a choice was ever on the table. And here's the deeper lesson underneath all of this. A raise doesn't make you wealthy just because your income went up. Wealth depends far less on how much your income increases, and far more on how much of that increase you actually keep and convert into assets. Here's what makes this genuinely risky over time, not just disappointing. Lifestyle upgrades tend to be far easier to start than to reverse. A larger apartment, a nicer car payment, a higher grocery budget, these become new fixed costs, not optional luxuries you can simply undo if your income later drops or growth slows. This is why income volatility, a layoff, an industry downturn, a business slowing hits harder for people whose spending scaled up in step with every raise than for people who kept fixed costs relatively stable while income grew. The single variable that determines whether a raise actually builds wealth or just raises your cost of living is whether you decide what happens to it before your spending does. One simple approach: automatically direct a fixed percentage of every raise towards saving or investing before you have a chance to spend it. Say, 50% of the increase moved into savings or a retirement account the moment it arrives, before it's ever visible in your everyday checking balance. The mechanism is simple. Spending tends to expand to match whatever's easily available. Remove the availability and you remove the expansion. Lifestyle, guilt-free, because the decision was already made. By year's end, person B has banked $7,000 deliberately, while still enjoying real, meaningful spending flexibility. Same raise, same job. A completely different financial outcome, determined entirely by one decision made before the money became familiar. So the next time that raise email arrives, remember what it actually is. It's not $20,000 landing in your life. A raise isn't a lump sum that lands in your account. It's a number that gets divided, taxed, absorbed, and quietly upgraded away before you ever get to decide what to do with it, unless you decide first.